The Crusades were military campaigns waged by Western European Christians during the Middle Ages for the defense and expansion of Christendom. What made a crusade distinct was that warriors involved in fighting received spiritual merit, usually a plenary indulgence granted by the Pope. A crusade was considered by Western European Christians to be a holy act, an act of sacrifice and pity for the love of Christ. For centuries before beginning of the Crusades, the first Muslim army swept out of Arabia to conquer Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. Some two-thirds of the Christian world between the 7th and the 11th centuries, Christians fought wars against Muslims to prevent them from making further conquests into Christian territories, or to reconquer what had already been captured in Spain. Christian kingdoms waged wars to recapture their homeland from the Arabs, while the Byzantine Empire in the East was engaged in centuries of war with the Muslims for control of Anatolia and other regions. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, swept through Syria and Palestine. In 1071, they defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Mans Ekert, conquering almost all of Anatolia. In response, Pope Urban II called the First Crusade, asking knights from all over Europe to band together and push back the Seljuks. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, the popes called more crusades to the Holy Land and also called for crusades in Spain to help push back the Muslim powers. Crusades against Muslims were not called with the intention of converting them to Christianity. Rather, they were called to regain control of territory that had been previously Christian, but had fallen to Muslim armies. Jerusalem had been conquered by the Muslims in 637 and was considered particularly important to Western Christians, since it was the site of Christ's crucifixion. Indeed, Jerusalem was revered as a holy site in the Christian cosmos, and it was particularly important to Western Europeans that it be brought again under Christian rule. When in the 11th century news arrived that Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem were being harassed and killed by the Seljuk Turks, this fact alone inspired many knights to join the First Crusade. Although the Crusades were called to reclaim land, greed was not a primary motivation. Professor Jonathan Riley Smith, the world's foremost expert on Crusades history, has proven that crusading was incredibly dangerous and expensive, and that virtually none of the knights who went could expect to gain wealth. Indeed, they often bankrupted themselves crusading. The primary motivation for crusading was spiritual, with the knights joining because they believed they were doing God's work by fighting and protecting Muslims to protect the Christian pilgrims and to reclaim holy sites like Jerusalem, and that was involving themselves in a crusade would win them spiritual merits. The Crusades to the Holy Land saw many failures, but also many successes. The First Crusade and the Third Crusade, for example, were both very successful, though ultimately later, at the close of the 13th century, the last Crusader holdings in Syria and Palestine would be captured by the Muslim Mamluk Empire. However, the Crusades in Spain achieved lasting victory, with the whole of Spain being ultimately recaptured by the Christians. Later, Crusades would also be called against the Ottoman Turks, such as the Crusade of Lepanto in 1571.